years ago, a gentleman wrote a book and became a popular speaker in the spirit or tradition of those books that seem to pop up so often that give you the 3 or 4 steps to fill in the blank, a happier life or success, or the 6, 7, 5, 3 habits of highly successful people, really happy people, whatever it might be. We love these books. We love these instructions. Give us the 3 things. Give us the 4 steps in the process. This book that was so popular a few years ago really was a wonderful reflection by a man who was an admiral in the Navy. I believe his name was James Clear. And he had been a Navy SEAL and had been a part of an extraordinary career of service in the Navy. He wrote his book, and he then went on the speaking tour and was at a lot of graduation ceremonies, popular in that set, and he gave some wonderful advice. But his first piece of advice that he offered was simply this: make your bed. And he went on to say that every morning get up and first thing make your bed, because at least that day you will have accomplished one thing. You will have some sense of direction and duty, speaking like a real Navy admiral. You will have a sense of completion and success, and you will move into the day with an attitude of readiness. And if nothing else, he went on to say, if you have a terrible day and don't meet with much success, when you come home, at least you will come home to a nicely made bed that you can crawl into at the end of the day. And then he went on to give some very deep advice about courage and perspective and priorities. The title of the book is simply, Make Your Bed. We like this. We like the instructions, the owner's manual, if you will, for living a life. We look for it all the time. These are bestsellers all the time. And I'd like to suggest that today, in these readings, and in that second reading in particular, we get an instruction manual, 3 or 4 steps to the life of a follower of Jesus. The 3 or 4 key elements that one might follow in order to come closer to the mission of companionship with Jesus, of being his hands and feet in the world. Pay attention to that second reading, the reading from Paul's letter to the Thessalonians. It's the first letter that St. Paul wrote. It's the first letter he writes back to a Christian community that's struggling to understand itself. A new Christian community still trying to figure out exactly what it is they're supposed to do in light of this new faith they have in Jesus as the Messiah, as the fulfillment of all the prophecies, predictions, all the hopes and dreams of the chosen people. And so Paul writes back to him, as he so often does to the communities that he has come to know, these nascent Christian communities, to give some direction. And pay attention, because Paul gives you the 3 steps. They're not throwaway lines. They're not meant to be just poetic, beautiful words that flow over us. It's an instruction manual that he's giving to first Christians and to these Christians, us Christians here today. Paul says to that early Christian community, rejoice always. Pray unceasingly. Give thanks. Rejoice always. Pray unceasingly. Give thanks. And maybe you, like me, hear those words and think, boy, I don't know that there's a whole lot to rejoice about these days. The days feel heavy and short. The worries of the world we carry in our own bodies and in our own hearts. The concerns are many. The frustrations are deep. Rejoice, Paul? Really? And yet, Paul's writing to a community under pressure to give up what they believe. He's writing to a people like us that aren't quite sure about the stability of the political structure of their world, or where the next disease might come from, or threat to their livelihoods. For those first Christians, as for us today, the world has many challenges, things that incite fear or desperation at times in us. And yet St. Paul writes to them and writes to us and says, rejoice always. About what? We'll hear those words of the prophet Isaiah as he talks about the longing of people for the one who is to come, who heals the brokenhearted, who preaches good news of liberation to the poor, who sets us free from fear. That one is this Jesus we know. That one that Isaiah longs for and puts those words to is the one we'll celebrate again this year in the darkness of a winter that feels heavy, the rebirth of hope of the God who loves us so much that God comes here, becomes one of us, and saves us from the inside out through love. Rejoice in that. That's as true today as it was yesterday or 50 years ago or 3,000 years ago. Rejoice that God loves us. Rejoice that we've been set free from the darkness of sin and the burdens of life. Rejoice, St. Paul says. And pray unceasingly. In trying to understand prayer, St. Ignatius Loyola said, prayer is this, one friend speaking to another. Pray unceasingly. All day long, pray. Have a conversation with God. Have a conversation with the saints and with Mary, this great tradition of ours. Pray unceasingly, talk and listen. I'm really good at the talking part. It's the listening part I struggle with. Maybe you can relate. Listen, create some quiet and some space in your day for the prayer that is God speaking into your heart, to your desires, your hopes. God who speaks to us through creation, through community, through church, through sacrament. Pray unceasingly, Paul says. Let your day be a continual conversation with the one who knows you better than you know yourself. Pray unceasingly and give thanks, Paul says. Let gratitude be your orientation to the world. Let thank you be the words that roll from your lips. Deepen the appreciation for what God has done and is doing for us. Name the graces of a day, no matter how simple they may seem or how silly it might feel. Name the graces every day. For this I am grateful, dear God. Another day. For this I am grateful. That fundamental attitude or orientation of gratitude is what all the saints knew. That even in the difficulties of life, and perhaps most dramatically in the difficulties of life, nonetheless to open our hearts in thanksgiving, in gratitude. Rejoice always. Pray unceasingly. Give thanks. And one last bit of advice. In the gospel, as we're told about John, the harbinger of the good news, the prophet who tells of the one who is to come, notice how it's described what he's doing, what his job in this world is. Pay attention to the mission statement or the job description of John the Baptist, because it's yours too and mine. It's the role of this church in the world, where John the evangelist tells us, and John the Baptist came to testify to the light. To testify to the light. To point out the light. To show the world the light. To be light for a world so desperately in need of hope and healing and reconciliation and compassion. A world so desperately in need of kindness and generosity. The people we encounter every day, the ones we know and the ones who are strangers to us, in this ever-expanding call to kinship. Testify to the light by the way you live. That doesn't mean be delusional and deny the challenges of the day. It means dig deep into your deeply held awareness of God's place in your life. God around you and within you, God working through you to offer a kind word or a healing moment, or a simple word of hope. Rejoice always. Pray unceasingly. Give thanks and testify to the light. And it probably doesn't hurt to make your bed, too.